Hi, this story is called Old Indian Trick. It's hard to argue with an old Indian or his tricks. I was driving Lonnie Littlebird up to Billings for an evening diabetes checkup at the Deaconess Hospital when we pulled into the Blue Cow Cafe on the Crow Reservation just off I-90 for some supper. The Blue Cow had been a restaurant longer than it had been a casino. Its Montana breakfast served all day as featured in Reader's Digest consisted of a half pound of bacon, 4 jumbo eggs, 12 pancakes, 3/4 of a pound of hash browns, a pint of orange juice, and endless coffee. A Western epic, well known across the high plains. We'd gotten a late start. The sun was already sinking over the rolling hills of Little Bighorn country and was casting surrealistic shadows against the 1-ton hay bales of the Indian ranchers. It was September, and with the sporadic rain of a cool August, it looked like everybody was going to get a third cutting. We rolled the windows half down and made dogs stay in the truck. I lifted Lonnie, placed the legless man in his wheelchair, and rolled him in. He smiled at the remains of the day and picked up a free Shoshone Shopper newspaper as we passed through the double doors into the restaurant. I wheeled the old Cheyenne Indian to a booth by the window where I could keep an eye on the truck and on Dog, and where we could hear Montana Slim singing Round Up in the Fall through his nose on the radio in the kitchen. 1948 8N tractor, only $1,200. He held his gray and black hair back with a suntanned, wrinkled hand. Comes with a Dearborn front-end loader. I tipped my hat back, pulled a menu from the napkin holder, and looked at the tiny rainbows at the corners of his thick glasses. I don't need a tractor, Lonnie. It's a good price. Yes, it is so. I nodded, tossed the menu on the table, and glanced around. You think there's anybody here? He blinked and looked over my shoulder toward the cash register. My gaze followed his. Two sets of eyes stared at us, just above the surface of the worn-out wood-grain Formica counter. So, you weren't here when it happened? The Bighorn County deputy continued to take my statement. He was young and I didn't know him. Nope, we just stopped in for a little dinner and noticed that everybody was hiding, including Audrey behind me. And you're heading to Billings? I wondered what that had to do with anything. Yep. And the old Indian is with you? I had listened as he questioned Lonnie Littlebird and hadn't liked his tone. Lonnie. He stopped scribbling. Excuse me? I looked at my friend, now parked at the corner booth and still studying the shopper. His name is Lonnie Littlebird. He's an elder and a member of the Northern Cheyenne Tribal Council. The deputy gave me a long, tough guy stare, or as much as one he'd been able to cultivate in the 6 weeks he had spent at the Montana Law Enforcement Academy in Helena. He stabbed the still shiny black notepad with his pen for emphasis. I've got that in my notes. The deputy gave me a long, tough guy stare. Whoops, read that already. Good. He gave me more of a look, so I smiled at him. Then it won't be hard for you to remember his name. You didn't see anybody when you pulled in? Nope. No Indian male, approximately 25 years of age, with a... She didn't say Indian. She said dark hair with dark eyes. He didn't like being interrupted, and he liked being corrected even less. Look, mister. I made him look at the notebook for my name. A tall, heavy-set man entered the cafe. He wore a large silver belly hat with a .357 revolver and a star. He waved at the two behind the counter as I turned back to the deputy. Wanda's Crow. If she thought he was an Indian, she would have said so. I caught the eye of the woman with the hairnet. Wanda, was the kid Indian? After a brief conversation with the manager, they both shook their heads no. You need to quit jerking us around and get a more detailed description of the suspect and put out a unit to circle the vicinity. Is that what you do? He studied the notebook again for my name. Evidently, he wasn't a quick learner. I watched as the large man with the star stood behind his deputy. Wesley Burrell Best Bales, the sheriff of Bighorn County, was a legend. Heck, I'd seen him eat the Montana breakfast served all day, featured in Reader's Digest. Son, don't you recognize the highly decorated peace officer of Absaroka County, Wyoming? After telling the deputy to get in his unit and ride surveillance, Wes excused him and drank a cup of coffee while I talked to the manager. Ray Bartlett said a guy had come in and asked for a job, so he'd given him an application. The kid had sat in the corner booth till a couple of rodeo cowboys finished up at the buffet and departed. He had worked up his nerve, come to the register, pulled a .22 pistol from his waistband, stuck it in Wanda Pretty on Top's face, and demanded the cash. Wanda, figuring $214 wasn't worth her life and unsure if the .22 would kill her or just hurt real bad, handed it over. He asked for the change, and she'd sighed and then dutifully dumped the coins into a deposit bag. The kid made them get down on the floor, which Wanda said was fine with her because she was dying to get off her feet. Then he told them that if they moved in the next 10 minutes, he'd shoot them. Ray said that had been about 5 minutes ago when he came in. Wes filled himself another and motioned toward me, but I declined. Ray, what'd the kid look like? Tall, thin, stringy long hair and a straw cowboy hat, Ray thought. Jeans, a t-shirt, and one of them snap-up front vest western shirts. I nodded. Had the tail of the shirt out to cover the gun? Yup. Anything else? Ray thought some more. He smelled, and he had bad teeth. I looked to West and watched as he plucked the mic from his shoulder, and he called in the description to the deputies and assorted HPs he had out prowling. We shook hands. Thanks, Walt. You bet. I walked to the booth and knocked on the table to get Lonnie's attention. You ready to go? He nodded enthusiastically, but kept reading. They switched the electrical system over to 12 volts. He looked up. I don't know why people do that. A 6-volt system is good enough. Yes, it is so. I loaded Lonnie, folded up his wheelchair, and let Dog out. I watched as the beast relieved himself and memorized every smell between the lamppost and the truck. Then let him in the back and fastened my seatbelt. Lonnie was still reading The Shopper, and it was beginning to worry me. You all right? He didn't look up, but continued reading. Yes. I waited a minute. I apologized for that. He still didn't look at me. For what? The deputy in there. He finally turned his head. Why should you apologize for him? I stared through the windshield and started backing out. Where are we going, Walter? I thought Lonnie must have been getting forgetful. Well, we were going to go to your doctor's appointment, but it's so late, we'll have to go home and reschedule. He looked back at the paper. Oh, I thought you might want to go catch the young man who robbed the cafe. It was a rundown trailer park on the outskirts of Hardin, the kind that attracted tornadoes and discarded tires. We cruised the loop and stopped just short of a sun-weathered single-wide and a rusted-out Datsun pickup parked in the grassless yard. A television cast its flickering blue light across the curtain windows, and Wesley Bales, Ray Bartlett, and I turned to look at Lonnie, who folded his paper and glanced at the number on the dented mailbox alongside the dirt driveway. This is it. 644 Roundup Lane, Travis Mallory. Yes, it is so. I shrugged, placed my hat on the dash, and reached my arm behind the seat. Can I borrow your gun? Wes handed me his sidearm, and quietly closing the door behind me, I got out of the truck. I stuffed the big Colt in the back of my jeans as Wes got out on the passenger side with an .870 Remington he brought from his vehicle. I glanced over to make sure the interior lights of the truck had gone out. It was fully dark now, and the trailer park gave me an advantage by not having any street lights. I pulled out my wallet, rolled all the cash I had into a substantial wad, and then mounted the rickety aluminum stairs to knock on the screen door. I could make out the kitchenette and the carpet strip that led to what I assumed was the living room. Some reality show was playing on the television, and I had to knock again. After a moment, a weedy-looking young woman came to the door and looked at me. She did not open the screen and had the look of someone who had taken life on early, made some bad choices, and gotten knocked around pretty well. I grinned, and making sure she could see the 20 on top, gestured with the bills. Is Travis around? She looked uncertain. I got this money that John gave me to give to him. I know it's late, but I thought he might need it. It was a calculated risk, but then everybody knew somebody named John. She still didn't come close to the screen, and her voice was thin and halting. You can give it to me. Always let them see the money. I shook my head, but continued to smile. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't know you. Is Travis here? She didn't say anything, but turned and disappeared. I took a deep breath, glanced back to the truck, and wondered if there was trouble, what Wes thought he could do from way out there. I heard footsteps and watched as a tall, lanky young man stopped at the hallway. He wore dirty jeans, boots, and a grimy wife-beater t-shirt. He was holding a can of Coors Light and smoking a cigarette. Who are you? I'm a friend of John's. I was supposed to bring this money over to you. John who? It appeared not everybody knew a John after all. I took another calculated risk. They were working so well. John from the bar? I mean, you are Travis Mallory, right? I held up the cash. Something about money for you. Always let him see the money. He stepped forward, pushed open the screen door, and reached for the roll of bills. I let him have it, but then grabbed his wrist and, slipping the $3.57 from the back of my jeans and lodging it under his jaw, yanked him from the trailer in one heave. I turned the two of us back toward the truck. The doors were open, Wes was running across the yard with the shotgun, and the manager was nodding his head. Yes. 10 minutes later, we were booking Travis Mallory at the Bighorn County Jail under the watchful eyes of 2 Montana Highway patrolmen and 3 deputies, including the one who had questioned us at the Blue Cow. It appeared that the majority of eastern Montana law enforcement wanted to know how, after we'd stumbled onto a relatively cold 10:52, we had apprehended the suspect in less than 20 minutes. Travis had a 4-page rap sheet, starting with his stealing a car at the age of 14. He got caught and was remanded to juvenile detention. He got out, stole another car, got caught, was sent to a foster home, ran away, and stole yet another until he had graduated to producing meth in a bathtub. He had done a 2-spot in Deer Lodge for that, where a prison psychologist intimated that it was all a question of comparison. But if you set a bag of groceries next to Travis, the groceries would get into Stanford before he would. That's a little complicated. The police officers stood a little ways away from Lonnie, but snuck glances at him as he continued to read the Shoshone Shocker in the Bighorn County basement as I finished up with my written statement. Wes tugged at my sleeve. All right, how'd you know? I looked at the old Indian who folded his paper in his lap and waited along with the legendary Wesley Burrell Best Bales and the collected force for my reply. Why, Wes, that was just top-flight investigative work. I looked back at the group and tipped my hat, especially at the narrow-minded deputy. You fellas have a good night. I waited. We were racing a 150-car Burlington Northern Santa Fe down the Little Bighorn Valley, another famed site of monumental hubris and stupidity. There was a slight breeze rustling the sage and the buffalo grass, and the obelisk and markers of the 7th Cavalry almost discernible in the light of the just risen moon. Lonnie remained quiet, his veined arm resting on the doorsill, his thick-lensed glasses reflecting the stripe of the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon, what the Indians called the hanging road. Did I ever tell you about the rattlesnake I ran over with my father's 8N tractor? Lonnie said. I sighed and wondered what sort of pithy homespun philosophy this story would turn into. When I got back from Korea, he had 2 hayfields, and one was about 3 miles down the county road. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just finished cutting. I was a young man and in a hurry, but I saw this big rattler sunning himself on the road. Not the smartest thing to do, he chuckled. He was a big one, had 12 buttons on him. All right, Lonnie. How did you know it was Travis Mallory? He turned to look at me, hurt at my interrupting his story. And how in the world did you know that he lived at 644 Roundup Lane? He half smiled, and his eyes returned to the stars as he nodded with his words, O-I-T. I thought about the well-known phrase, old Indian trick? He continued nodding and carefully pulled Travis Mallory's Blue Cow Cafe employment application from the folds of his newspaper. He handed it to me. The form was completely filled out. Yes, it is so. And that, Kit, is what I was reading yesterday. An interesting little story. Sometimes grown-up stories have a little bit of stuff in the background that you need to know, like about the 7th Cavalry and other stuff. But enjoy, okay? Just as Audrey's getting up here. Bye-bye.